On today's episode, we talk to Andrea Cox, a licensed pre-planning funeral consultant. She's also one of our favorite and longest members on our Let's Talk About Death Clubhouse room.
That is an app for any of you who don't know what it is.
So let's get into the episode.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Capal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Capal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it. Welcome back to the old Let's Talk About Death. Today, we have a special guest.
We got Andrea Cox on today. She comes all the way from Canada to talk to us today. So, Dr. Nick, isn't that pretty cool?
It is really cool. She's across the sea.
Andrea, go ahead and say hi to the listeners out there.
Hello, everyone.
Well, thank you, Andrea. That was a great hello. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about why Andrea is on the show today. Let's Talk About Death has our own room on Clubhouse every Thursday nights from 9:30 to 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. And Andrea is one of our favorite Clubhouse members. She comes on quite often.
I didn't know that.
And she comes on very often, and she has some really good input. So that's why we have you on the show today. So, Andrea, first of all, you know a thing or two about death as well, being a pre-planner, correct? Is that correct? Am I saying that right?
Yes,
go ahead and actually give us your official title and a little bit about yourself that maybe we didn't kind of go over.
Thank you guys for having me. I just love partnering with people that are in this death and dying industry because I believe that when we come together, we can move mountains. So this is awesome. Thank you. So I am a licensed funeral pre-planner out here in Canada. So I'm licensed in Alberta and in BC. So I pretty much set up prepaid funeral and memorial packages with the various funeral homes with families who want to put in place their final arrangements before they pass away. So as you guys know, with your experience, it's a night and day when this is done ahead of time, as opposed to when someone passes away and the chaos and the confusion and the family breakdowns and the list kind of goes on. So that is what I do. And I also, like you guys, have a room in Clubhouse, and it's just educating, right? I just do as much as I can, just educating people on the topic of dying. Because it's going to happen to one out of one of us. It's not an if, it is a when. So thank you for having me.
Well, Andrea, there's nothing sexier than pre-planning your funeral. That's for sure. We've been preaching it for a while. It makes the arrangement and the funeral or memorial so much easier on the family when they can actually have everything written down one way or another, whether money is involved or not. So, thank you. And explain a little bit about Canada. Do you find Canada a little different with the way they pre-plan? I'm not sure if you know a lot about the States, but what are your obstacles, or what do you find when pre-planning in Canada?
I think the most difficult part, and I think we're going to all say this, is that people don't think they're going to die, right? And they don't want to talk about it. So it's such a taboo topic. So at the end of the day, I think it's difficult. It is difficult because although we actually run webinars once or twice a month, and although we're getting the numbers out from time to time with people coming to understand the importance of, pre-planning, having that conversation with your loved ones as to what your final wishes are in regards to even having a will, right? They're coming out, but they're not actioning it, which is why I'm actually writing a book. But that's another story. But it is difficult. It is a difficult position to be in for sure.
Let me ask you this, just for listeners out there, it's a licensed pre-planning consultant. What do you have to do to get that license?
Right. So I hold 2 licenses here in Canada. So I hold one with the Insurance Council. So it's just taking a course and then taking the license, I guess. And then the same, I have another one with the Alberta Funeral Board, and that's my pre-need license. And it's the same thing. It's a course, and then you take the license. So Yeah, that's what that
Okay.
is. So with the one with the Alberta Funeral Board, there's different modules that I do the theory side and the practical side. And trust me, I wasn't planning on doing that course, and I've learned a lot on that other side that you guys do. I lift my hands to all of you guys. I've done it. I don't want to go through it again, but wow, it's a learning experience for sure.
I got a question for Ben. My understanding of the United States when it comes to pre-planning, that has to be done through a licensed funeral director, correct?
Not necessarily, actually, because you can go through an insurance agent too on some things. Funeral professionals tend to know more about the subject because, like Andrea was saying, people don't want to talk about death. So when it comes to actually pre-planning your funeral, most individuals will go to a funeral home just because they know they have the knowledge.
Now, do you in the
understanding.
United States as a funeral professional, do you have to get a license in pre-planning?
No, but if you do anything with insurance, you will have to become an insurance agent. In my personal, I am not an insurance agent. I do pre-needs through other third parties. So I actually don't hold the insurance, and we do irrevocable trusts, so it has nothing to do with insurance policies. Does that answer your question, Doctor?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to clarify for all of our listeners out there, what is the difference between her pre-planning consultant license versus like a funeral director? Like, what is, I guess, in your guys' opinion, maybe you guys got to go back and forth a little bit. What is the difference between you two?
Yeah, that is such a good question because at the end of the day, here in Canada, we have pre-needs workers who are in the funeral home. And the difference that I've noticed is that if someone wants to get a pre-need done, they would go to the funeral home and they would work with, say, a pre-need specialist within the funeral home. And here in Canada, 95% of the funeral homes work with an insurance company called Assurant Life of Canada, and they hold the funeral, the pre-need policies. So what ends up happening is that when someone does a funeral pre-need, the funeral home is the beneficiary, and then Assurant Life of Canada pays the funeral home within 1 to 2 business days. So I represent the insurance company. So although I work with various funeral homes, it's like I have to find my own clients. Does that make sense? So that's the difference. So I am licensed. And because I hold my license with the Alberta Insurance Council, like here in Canada, funeral homes are not, if you're not licensed with the Alberta Insurance Council, you cannot put on your funeral contract a cash disbursement. So what I mean by the cash disbursements are the costs, the third party costs that the funeral home cannot lock in the contract for your pre-need. So I'm able to do that for those in the funeral home because I'm licensed with the Alberta Insurance Council.
So are you actually doing a guaranteed contract then when you do when these families come in and they pick out everything, right? They pick out their
Correct.
services, they picked out the thing. Are you guaranteeing that is going
Correct.
to stay the same? Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
Because you're absolutely right, because here in the States there's things that we don't know. Like we don't know if the obituary in the local paper is going to go up $200-300
Right.
by the end of
Right.
But you're saying because you are an actual insurance agent in theory, correct? That is correct, right? You can actually guarantee that no matter what the cost changes by that time, that family will be taken care of for everything, or no?
On the funeral home side, yes.
Okay.
But the cash disbursement can be there to cover those third-party expenses. So like for the obituaries, for catering, the funeral home that I work with here, they have a family, they have a flower shop, so we can lock in those rates. We cannot lock in the cemetery bill. We don't lock that in. Like, you know what I mean? So when I sit with a family, I do, depending on the funeral home, I either do 1 or 2 forms for the funeral home, and then I do the 1 form for Assurant Life of Canada that is guaranteeing the funeral home.
I see what you're saying, and that's what we do too. We actually set up
Right.
2 contracts. One is a guaranteed, the funeral home's prices, the casket, the services, et cetera,
Right.
and then we have one which is the cash advance items because we don't know what they're going to be. So we put the maximum in there so that when that day comes, the family most likely will have everything taken care of. So
Right.
that sounds very similar. What
Right.
you're saying is very similar to that. Now, when you meet these families, do you meet them at the funeral homes themselves, or do you meet them in your own like office?
It depends. It's what they want. So it could either be at the funeral home. I do now a lot of Zooms. I could go to their homes. So it's really up to them.
When you meet with a lot of families, are they most of the time are they looking for more of a consultation, or are they actually ready to put the funds down? In your experience,
I do a lot of the consultations, and then I also do the actual program. But I would say, based on, if I were to do a ratio on those that actually get the contract signed, it's quite low. And I find it doesn't happen right away. So it takes time, which is why I'm branching into doing other services just to be able to, get kind of things going, which is also why I'm writing the book, because people don't want to, right? They feel like if they do this, they're going to die. Just like if they do their wills, it means that they're going to die. So they don't want to, right? But that's so far from the truth.
Don't walk under a ladder. Don't see a black
Oh,
cat.
gosh.
Don't sign your will.
Oh,
Right?
my
I mean,
gosh.
that's the reality.
Andrea, are you
Right.
saying people don't want to talk about death? Is that what you're
No.
saying?
Okay,
Not
so
at
let me ask you this question, and this is for both Benny and Andrea. I know we've talked about this on Clubhouse a lot, but for the people that don't hear us on Clubhouse, why is it so important for pre-planning? Just like a quick synopsis between you two.
For
Andrea,
sure.
you're the guest, so you go first.
You want me to go first? The importance, one, of pre-planning is that we are able to do what our loved ones want. That is one. We are taking away that stress. Like, when someone passes away, they are at the hospital. The first question is going to be what funeral home, right? So we're taking away all of that work. Like, if it's someone that's like a caregiver, let's say, and they've been with that loved one for however long, they're now on burnout, right? So, just doing as much as you can, because at the end of the day, death is going to happen. So you just want to be able to take that stress and that burden away from your loved ones during that difficult time. So that would be one of the biggest reasons why pre-planning is so important. And another reason is to lock in today's prices, right? So, what I call her grandma, she passed away last October. And when she bought her plot for at the cemetery, she paid almost $500. And now that same plot is over $5,000. So it's locking in today's dollars.
That's an awesome answer, Andrea, and I 100%. I'm just going to piggyback on that. I think the most important reason for pre-need is so the family can actually grieve.
Mm-hmm.
That's one big thing, one less burden, which is a ton if you don't, because I'm on the opposite side of this. I see the families that don't do pre-need. And I'm talking the worst case scenarios of telling one kid they want to be cremated and another kid they want to be buried. So now there's extra stress. So are we doing everything right or wrong? Right? Especially in the times of, a lot of the time their parents or their loved one is not sane of mind anymore. So now they don't even have the opportunity to have known what they wanted. So what I find is the families that do pre-need, A, they don't have to worry about the monetary side, which is incredible. B, they can actually experience the funeral / memorial service, right? So Dr. Nick, you and I say it all the time, that the most important thing and the value in a funeral is so that the family can actually grieve, right? So if a family has the opportunity to come into a funeral home or go into a church or go into the pavilion at their local town, whatever they're doing for their service, and actually be able to be present and be able to go through their grieving journey. How do you like that, Dr. Nick? That was pretty sexy, wasn't it?
I mean, it's subpar at best, I feel like, but
I would say that's the reason for pre-need, right?
So another thing, Andrea, since we have you on the show, a lot of our listeners know why Ben and I are in the end of life work, the death work, if you will. What brought you here? I mean, what's your story?
Wow, what is a good question. So my background is actually in HR. I did, staffing for years. I got laid off and I started working with a unionized insurance company, and I was going to union members' homes to explain to them their permanent benefits. And while I was going to the homes, I'd always ask the questions, do you have a will? Do you have a will? And people would tell me no. And there's this one couple, I went to their home and they told me yes. And I was really like, really? You guys have a will? Because no one says yes, right? So when I asked them that question, they told me that the reason why they have a will is because a close family friend died from um, domestic violence. And when they went to the funeral, the children were there with social services. So that was one thing that got my mind kind of thinking. And then I went to this other gentleman's home. He was from Nigeria, and I was telling him about the funeral package. So what I was doing was I was enrolling them into permanent benefits. One was a funeral coverage. And this guy told me straight that he didn't need it because he was not going to die.
Yikes.
And he was
Superman.
serious as a heart attack. And that's when I thought, oh my God, there's a big
no pun
problem
intended,
here.
right?
Right?
He was as serious as a heart attack. Wow.
Good for him.
Sorry, Andrea. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. So
that's
with
part of my
those
problem,
two,
Andrea.
I just realized that there is a problem, and we need to start talking about this. And that's pretty much how I started what I do. So,
well, welcome to the crew. We love you. I hope you keep continuing doing the great work you do out there. Now, last thing we want to talk about before we get into Q&As is Clubhouse, right? Why do you like Clubhouse so much? Why do you enjoy it?
Do you know what, you guys? Seriously, I find that Clubhouse, I have found my tribe. Doing the work I do, it is very difficult. And,
Absolutely.
being able to go into rooms that people understand, it's a part of the relief that, wow, you know what I mean? People get it, right? So you go into a room with people who want to be there. Doing what I do, there's times that, I could be in a room with 70 people. I could be in a room with one. And, it's just nice that you're able to partner with people to just help people understand the why behind what we do. And they get it. That's the biggest part. They get it. I'm not like knocking my head against the wall because at the end of the day, let's be real. If you haven't experienced a death and if you don't know what it's like, to you, it feels like you're not here for me because I don't need your service. Right. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to talk about it. They just want to continue to ignore
that just happens. That just happens in Canada, right? We're in the United States. We're safe, right? We live forever, right?
Oh,
we
don't absolutely.
Have to worry
love
about all
to
that
talk
Canada
about death here in America.
Here, So
the taboo.
No,
I'm
even
here.
100% with you. There is definitely a wall, if you will, between us and most people. So, with that being said, let's get to some questions. What do you think?
Q&A, everyone loves that Q&A.
Q&As, those Q&As. We
You gotta get me those
Q&As. Okay, I'll start the first one here. Andrea, what is one of the hardest parts of working around death? The
hardest part, there's so much that's difficult, but I think the hardest part is just helping people realize that death is going to happen to all of us, one out of one of us. So let's put a plan in place. So it's just getting to people understanding that it is going to happen. That's the hardest part.
Dr. Nick, what is the hardest part of working around death?
As much as I believe that I've become a little bit callous towards death, I do think as I work more and more and work deeper and deeper as a psychologist with people who are grieving, there's a lot of things that I still haven't touched about death with myself. And I think that's the hardest part of being a clinician, a psychologist in general, is that when you talk to people after people after people, there is going to be some triggers that come up. And I think for a lot of it, like I said, there is a callus that I built around death, but there is some things that still kind of puncture the skin, if you will, a little bit. Ooh. So I think I would say that's the hardest part is being hit with something that you're just not prepared for, that you maybe have not personally dealt with yet. So I would say that's my hardest challenge.
I think my hardest part of working around death real quick is the helplessness at times, especially when it comes to the death of a child, right. Or the death of something that's so innocent and there's no reasoning for it other than some answers upstairs that eventually we'll all get, hopefully. So that would be my hardest. Dr. Nick, you want to take on the next?
Well,
cue?
Ben, I'm glad you told me about your hardest. Let's go to question.
Shot to the heart,
and you're to blame. Question 2. What are the let's start with Benny on this one. What are the most common ways of grieving that you guys have noticed? That's part A of question 1. And then the part B is, and the most unusual ways. So I need to know the most common ways and the most unusual ways that you guys have noticed how people deal with grief.
Let's talk about the 5 stages again of death and dying, which is mostly Kubler-Ross brought in for actual dying patients, and that's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I would say the most that I'm seeing now, realize I'm seeing most families within the first week of the death. The death itself, the first week. What I'm seeing most of the time, I don't really see the bargaining side as much, but I do see anger a lot. I see anger a lot. And I do see depression a lot. I would say, honestly, and I know this sounds, I do see acceptance. I do see acceptance a lot, but I do deal with anger probably more than I should. And I think a lot of that has to do with, Nick, what's our podcast called?
Let's talk about death, I think.
And the problem is people haven't talked about death, and they haven't talked about death with their family, their loved ones. They haven't had a pre-need, Andrea. Let's talk about that. And that's where I think a lot of the anger comes from. The anger is actually coming from a lot of things that have nothing to do with the death, if you actually look into it. So those are the things that I see. Now, Andrea, what are the most unusual ways? I'll have to think about that. Andrea, first start with the common ways of grieving that you see when it comes to pre-need setup.
Why is this question so hard, guys?
Well, we don't ask the easy ones.
Like, obviously not.
I mean, we do have a doctor on the board, Dr. Nick on the board.
Okay, so, and as you guys know, I more deal with people beforehand, right? So this is why this is more difficult for me.
Well, anticipatory grief can be really tough too. I mean, go from that lens, like what do you see? What do you normally see when people are talking or thinking about either their own death or someone else's?
Well, I think overall it's just the fear of death overall. So they just want to ignore it.
Ben and I have always kind of felt like we're the representation of the Grim Reaper in the room, if you will. And I wonder, do you get that experience too with what you do? Do you feel like people are like, oh no, she's here. All right, guys, get ready, buckle up.
All the time. You know, it's interesting. Sorry, guys, I'm going to go into a story. So unfortunately, we had a young boy pass away. This is the first time that I started to do, because if it's a family that I know, I will do the funeral. I'll help with that, right? And when people walked in, because I was at the door to greet them, and they literally walked by me like I was nobody. And these guys know who I am, right? So yeah, people, and you guys probably notice this when you post on Facebook or on Instagram, how you will post and no one will. It's very rarely that someone does a like or something, but yet you put on your own personal pictures and you have all these likes all over the place, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And
that part is hard.
That's an interesting thing, because the more I get into the profession that I'm in, I'm realizing that those people do like the comments. They're afraid to admit that they like the comments, right? Because they're afraid because they don't want to be the creep. So we'll take on those extra burdens, right? We'll put it on our shoulders that we're the creepy ones out there talking about death. Which, would be awesome someday if we actually became the norm, right? Wouldn't it be awkward if we were actually there's a show about let's talk about living instead of let's talk about death.
Everyone's talking about death.
Everybody's talking about death, No, then we wouldn't. They wouldn't need us anymore, right? We'd just be out of occupations probably. Because I find, Andrea, and I think you said it earlier, and I think you nailed it, and Dr. Nick would agree. I think the main focus of what we do is on educating, right? Because the more we can educate, the more of understanding there is, and the sting, or what did you say? The abrasion? Did you say?
I don't know, but let's go with it.
Let's go with it. That's what educate.
Let me step into this question, because I think
step into it, Nick.
So it's funny. It's funny if you think about us three: Ben, Andrea, and I. Andrea helps the people before the death. Ben helps the people during the exact moment of the death, and then I come in and clean up the mess.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and the reality is that's, I think that's the best word to say about grieving. It's a mess. You know, it's all over the place. It's it's not fluid, right? It's all over the place. I always call it like the storm of grief, right? You have like this crazy thunder and lightning, and then you get a little bit of calm, and then you get thunder and lightning, and then maybe you got some abrasive. There you go. There's your word.
Abrasive right there. A little abrasion.
Rain or whatever, and then again you get maybe a week without it.
You get the rainbow.
And I think that's the best way. When it says the common ways of grieving, Ben is absolutely right. I think one of the easiest things you'll see a lot of people with is anger. But we all know clinically, right? Anger is depression turned outwards. Right. So if you really want to put it that way, technically anger is just a form of depression, and it's a form of grief. Right. So, and if you look at men too, we all know that, right? Men can't show crying because that's a weakness. So how can they show it? Well, beating the hell out of a wall or running around screaming at people. It's acceptable, unfortunately. But that's the reality. The most unusual way I've seen it, I have actually had clients who still to this day, and I mean, it's the death probably has happened 3, 4, maybe 7 years ago, still have not accepted it happened. I would say that's the unusual ones, the ones that are just so in shock, or it's so painful that they just cannot go there. So it's like they talk about, and they do everything they possibly can to actually avoid talking about the death. Again, the whole reason why we have the podcast, Let's Talk About Death, is because everybody tends to avoid talking about death. And when you lose a loved one, and especially someone that you truly loved, our dad said it best, the more you love someone, the more you're going to be hurt when they're gone.
Well, I just would like to thank you, Andrea, for being a guest today. Thank you so much. Just like we said earlier, we have a Clubhouse every Thursday night from 9:30 to 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, and the room is called Let's Talk About Death. Feel free, everybody out there, to send us questions on Let's Talk About Death pod@gmail.com. Please share us with your friends. Spread the word about our mission. Let's talk about death. Let's get some pre-needs set up, right, Andrea? Let's get those set up. If you like us, review us. Check out Andrea, and especially if you're in Canada, if you're north of the border, check her out. I'm sure she can answer any questions about pre-needs or about the funeral or memorial service, anything that you need, how to get money set up, all that jazz.
Andrea, before we wrap up, is there a good place for our listeners to get a hold of you?
Yeah, probably my Instagram handle. So Andrea_9474. Or I'm on Facebook, also Andrea Cox.
Oh, and also you did mention your Clubhouse as well. Do you want to tell when you do that? Tuesdays, you said, I think?
Yeah, so right now it's just the third Monday of every month. So, and that is at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Andrea, I'm sure you know this, because if you're not talking about death,
you're not living. Thank you guys for listening, and come on back.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, guys. This was great. Thanks.